They thought they could bully a quiet homeowner in the middle of a deadly winter storm, until they realized the powerless man they humiliated was the one who carried the badge, the authority, and the final word. If you love stories where arrogance meets justice and karma hits at the perfect moment, hit subscribe and don't miss what happens next, because this one escalates fast. The wind was howling so hard that night it felt like the sky itself was splitting apart, and by the time the power went out across the entire subdivision, most of the families on Redwood Hollow Drive were already panicking, but I wasn't. I had prepared for storms like this my entire career, and the heavy-duty generator humming steadily beside my garage was proof of that preparation, keeping my lights on, my furnace running, and my elderly neighbor's oxygen machine powered through an extension line I'd run quietly across the fence earlier that evening, and I would have been content to let the storm rage and the darkness swallow the rest of the neighborhood if not for the sharp knock on my door that came just after 9 p.m., a knock too deliberate to belong to someone scared and too aggressive to belong to someone polite. When I opened the door, the frigid air burst in along with 3 figures bundled in expensive winter coats, their boots clean despite the snow, their expressions tight with the kind of self-righteous irritation that only HOA board members seem capable of perfecting, and at the front stood Denise Halbrook, president of the Redwood Estates Homeowners Association, clutching a clipboard to her chest like it was a shield, her lips already pursed before she even spoke. She informed me, without greeting, that my generator was in violation of community noise ordinances and emergency aesthetic guidelines, a phrase so absurd in the middle of a county-wide blackout that I almost laughed, but she didn't smile, and neither did the 2 men behind her wearing reflective vests with HOA compliance printed across the back, and she continued by stating that multiple residents had complained about the unsightly industrial equipment, visible from the street and the disruptive mechanical hum, echoing through the cul-de-sac, and I glanced past her shoulder at the pitch-black houses lining the road, each one frozen and powerless, and asked calmly which residents had complained because, from where I stood, it looked like my generator was the only thing keeping this block from turning into an icebox. Denise's eyes narrowed as she said that rules applied equally to everyone, emergencies included, and that if I did not voluntarily shut it down, the HOA would be forced to seize the equipment until compliance could be reviewed at the next board meeting, which would be held once weather permitted. I studied her face for any hint that this was a joke, but she was deadly serious, and the wind gusted again, carrying with it the distant wail of sirens from the highway where accidents were already piling up, and I told her that shutting down the generator was not an option because I had medical equipment next door relying on it, and that was when one of the compliance men stepped forward and said that unauthorized power redistribution to neighboring properties was another violation, and before I could respond, they walked past me toward the side of the house where the generator sat, snow swirling around their boots as if even the storm disapproved of what they were doing, and I followed, warning them not to touch it, but Denise simply nodded to the men, and they began disconnecting the cables with brisk efficiency like they had rehearsed this, and when I reached for my phone to call the county dispatcher, Denise snapped that involving law enforcement would only complicate matters for me and potentially result in fines for obstruction, and that was the moment I decided to let this play out, because sometimes the fastest way to teach someone a lesson is to give them exactly what they think they want. The men lifted the generator, heavy, expensive, the kind designed to power an entire house, and loaded it into the back of an HOA utility truck parked crookedly in my driveway, and before climbing into the passenger seat, Denise handed me a bright orange violation notice already filled out, citing sections and subsections about unauthorized equipment and nuisance disturbances, and as the truck pulled away into the blizzard, my house lights flickered and died, plunging my living room into darkness, and from next door I heard the faint, panicked shout of Mr. Alvarez when his oxygen concentrator powered down. I didn't waste time, pulling on my county-issued winter coat from the hall closet, the one with the badge stitched subtly near the collar, though I zipped it high enough to hide the insignia, and I stepped out into the storm, not toward the retreating HOA truck, but toward my own vehicle parked in the garage, a county sheriff's SUV equipped with emergency lights and a radio tied directly into the regional command network. I slid behind the wheel, radioed dispatch to confirm the widespread outage and road closures, and then asked a simple question. Had any permits or legal authority been granted to a homeowners association to confiscate privately owned emergency equipment during a declared weather emergency? And the dispatcher's pause was answer enough before she replied with a firm negative and asked why. And I told her I'd explain shortly and requested a deputy unit to meet me at the entrance to Redwood Estates. Within 10 minutes, red and blue lights cut through the white curtain of snow at the neighborhood's gate just as the HOA truck attempted to exit onto the main road, likely heading to their storage facility on the other side of town, and I pulled in front of them, blocking their path, stepping out slowly as the deputy cruiser rolled up behind, and Denise climbed out of the passenger seat looking furious, already launching into a speech about harassment and abuse of authority, but she stopped mid-sentence when I unzipped my coat and let the badge on my chest catch the flashing lights, and the color drained from her face so fast I almost felt sorry for her, almost, and I introduced myself formally as County Sheriff Daniel Mercer, informed her that she and her associates were currently in possession of seized private property without legal authority, potentially endangering the life of a medically vulnerable resident, and that unless the generator was returned immediately and reconnected, this situation would escalate beyond HOA bylaws into criminal territory. The compliance officers exchanged glances that said they had not signed up for this level of trouble, and Denise tried to recover, insisting she had no idea I was law enforcement and that she was simply enforcing community standards, and I replied evenly that ignorance of a homeowner's profession did not grant her the right to override state emergency protections, and I asked the deputy to document the interaction on his body camera as the men unloaded the generator back into the snow. We escorted the truck back to my driveway where I personally supervised the reconnection of every cable, and when the engine roared back to life and my lights flickered on again, I ran the extension cord back to Mr. Alvarez's house and confirmed his machine was operational before turning my attention back to Denise, who now looked more like someone caught shoplifting than a neighborhood authority figure, and I informed her that I would not be pressing charges at that moment but would be filing a formal report with the county attorney's office regarding the HOA's overreach during a declared emergency, and that any further interference with emergency equipment would result in immediate arrest. She nodded stiffly, snow collecting in her hair, and climbed back into the truck without another word. But the storm was far from over, and neither, as it turned out, was the fallout. By morning, word had spread through Redwood Estates that the HOA had tried to confiscate the sheriff's generator in the middle of a blizzard, and neighbors who had once been too intimidated to question fines or petty citations began knocking on my door, not to complain, but to share stories of selective enforcement, unexplained fee hikes, and threats of liens over trivial infractions, and as I listened, patterns emerged that suggested Denise's board had been operating less like a community association and more like a private enforcement racket, leveraging fear of penalties to maintain control, and when I quietly requested financial records through proper legal channels, what surfaced was even worse. Emergency funds earmarked for storm preparedness had been redirected toward cosmetic entrance renovations and holiday decor contracts awarded to a landscaping company owned by Denise's brother-in-law. The generator incident, dramatic as it had been, was merely the crack in a much larger facade, and within weeks, a formal investigation was underway, auditors combing through invoices while residents attended emergency meetings demanding transparency, and Denise attempted damage control by circulating a letter claiming she had acted in good faith to preserve neighborhood harmony, but the phrase rang hollow against the backdrop of documented financial misconduct, and when the county attorney announced charges related to misappropriation of association funds, the same cul-de-sac that had once fallen silent under her authority buzzed with a different energy, one of accountability. In the end, the board was dissolved and replaced through a special election, new bylaws were drafted to explicitly prohibit seizure of personal emergency equipment, and a community emergency response plan was established with my office's guidance to ensure no resident would ever again be left in the dark because of bureaucratic arrogance, and on the first clear night after the storm finally passed, as snowbanks glittered under streetlights restored by the utility crews, Mr. Alvarez walked over with a thermos of coffee to thank me, saying that when his machine shut off he had genuinely thought it might be his last night, and I told him that sometimes the real power in a neighborhood doesn't come from generators or boards or titles. It comes from people willing to stand up when something's wrong, even if that means letting others underestimate them first. And as for Denise, the last I heard she was contesting the charges while the same neighbors she once fined over mailbox paint were testifying about intimidation and coercion, and every time I hear the low steady hum of my generator during the next storm, I'm reminded that authority isn't about clipboards or loud voices in the dark, it's about responsibility, and the night they seized my generator thinking I was just another rule-breaking homeowner was the night they learned that some rules are smaller than the law, and some storms reveal far more than just who has power, they reveal who deserves it.